What is up, everybody? Today, I'm going to go over exactly how to calculate your calories and your macros for fitness because there's not a lot of light shed on this specific subject, and it is heavily varied depending upon people's opinions. So I'm going to throw this out there. This is just my opinion. This works very well for me, and it also works very well for thousands of people that I've prescribed it to over the years. And chances are it might work very good for you as well. So here's what we got going on. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of what I'm talking about today, let's first go over this real quick. On one end, we have calories consumed outweighing the calories going out. So calories coming in, calories going out. If you're consuming more calories than what you're burning on a daily basis, you're gonna be in this perpetual chain of weight gain, and it doesn't take a lot of calories. I'm talking, if you overeat 500 calories a day, you're gonna gain a pound a week, and there's 52 weeks in a year, so it's not gonna take very long for you to gain weight, and that's called creeping obesity. It just sort of happens. Now, if you minimize that creeping obesity, and let's just say you gain a pound a month, well, there's 12 months in a year, and you combine that out for 5 years, and you can see how it's very easy for anybody to become overweight. So beginning to understand some of these concepts is really crucial so we can minimize our disease risk factors, but not just that, because that's not very motivating to a lot of people of minimizing risk 30 years from now. What's more motivating, I think, is being able to move through the world better today. Make tomorrow just a little bit better. Increase your energy just a little more the next day. Increase your strength, increase your stamina, so you can take this thing, this body that you're experiencing life in, and really fine tune it. So calories consumed, this is anything you're eating over here. Then on this side, on the bottom of the chart, we have BMR, which is your basal metabolic rate. That's how many calories you would burn if you were lying around all day long, not really doing anything but awake. And that's going to take up the majority of your outgoing calories. Then we have non-exercise activity thermogenesis, otherwise known as NEAT. And that's how many calories you're burning just doing your daily routine, even if it's not sanctioned exercise, but you're still active. Whatever kind of activity you're doing can be considered there. Now, depending upon the person, the EAT, which is exercise activity thermogenesis, can outweigh the NEAT, but the NEAT should be something where you're moving most of the time. Just so long as you're not sitting for most of your day, you're gonna be doing pretty good. So if you have a desk job, you can do little tricks like getting a standing desk or just taking every 10 minutes to go for a little bit of a walk around the office, something just to keep moving so you're not sitting most of the time. Then EAT, exercise activity thermogenesis, and then TEF is the thermal effect of food. And I'll go over exactly what that is because the thermal effect of food is different for every macro that we have. Protein has a 20 to 30% thermal effect, meaning it takes 20 or 30% of the calories that you consume to actually digest the food, which is really good. The separation in the 20-30% is always based upon the quality of the food. If you have a low quality protein, not exactly quality, maybe that's the wrong word, but a fast digesting sort of protein, like a whey protein, and I'm for whey protein, don't get me wrong, I'm not against it, but if you're consuming most of the calories from it, you're gonna get only 20% thermal effect versus eating meat is gonna get you 30% thermal effect, like a chicken breast or something like that. And then carbs are very nominal, only 5 or 10%, but still, that difference in 5 or 10% is pretty big, so then we're talking like white bread versus whole sweet potato, something like that. And then fats is 0 to 3%. It's very negligible, the thermal effect that you get from fats, but still 0 is gonna be like a vegetable oil and 3 is gonna be like a butter. So there's some control there you have, but you guys can clearly see that what I'm talking about here is the highest thermal effect has coming from whole food. So the more whole foods you eat, the higher the thermal effect is. Now, why are we gaining weight is the question, and I think I have an answer to that. There's 2 reasons. Number 1, the thermal effect of food. And then number 2, how full you are. Now, if you're consuming mostly processed foods, or if you're getting your calories in a liquid source, like an energy drink or a latte through the drive-through at the coffee shop, those things are going to make you starving in about 15 or 20 minutes after you consume them because those calories are pre-digested liquid sugars that then speed up your gastric emptying process so you're hungry. You can take the same amount of calories that you get in a latte or an energy drink and you can consume that in the form of whole foods, and you're actually going to be full for a longer period of time, and you're not going to get these signals for hunger. So the reason most people are consuming more calories than what they burn is because they're eating mostly processed foods. Or it doesn't have to be mostly, it can even be 30%. Any higher than 30% processed foods is going to make you hungry, and you're going to eat more. So keep in mind that companies manufacture foods on purpose to be pre-digested, so your gastric system empties fast. That way you consume more food. This is any drive-through that you go through, anything in a box or a bag at the grocery store is going to have the same effect. And food scientists know what they're doing. They engineer the foods so that you eat more of it, which means you buy more, and their profit margins are higher due to volume. So this is a good explanation sort of why people eat more. Now let's get into the calories. Now, determining exactly how many calories, carbohydrates, fats, and proteins that you need to eat is variable based upon you as a person. It's going to be a little different for everybody, but we can get a good example of exactly how to break that down per person. Now, no one likes mathing. Mathing is very difficult. I learned math for two reasons, because I really had no idea how to do math most of my life. And then determining where I should be as far as calories when I was over 100 pounds overweight, and then learning how to do calculations for powerlifting. These are the two reasons why I really started to develop math skills. So determining some basic things like this, I know math is kind of scary, but it's one of those things where you're gonna have to do hard things if you want to improve. So if you're the kind of person that doesn't really enjoy math, just tough it up and do the damn math. It's not that big of a deal. So if we're going to determine how many calories we need to consume for fitness, we first have to consider our activity level. Now, we don't want to overblow our activity level by thinking it's in more proportions than what it actually is. We want to be down to earth. We want to be grounded when we're thinking about our activity level. So I'm going to use myself for an example as I go through this calculation and kind of show you guys exactly what I'm talking about. You're going to take your body weight times 10 or 15 for your baseline calories. Now the 10 would be somebody who is sedentary, and the 15 would be somebody who's very active. So that's why I use my stats for this calculation. Now typically I train 5 or 6 days a week for at least an hour a session, and I have multifaceted training. I do running, I do powerlifting, I do hypertrophy training, and I do high intensity interval training. So I'm going to be a 15. So for me, I would take my weight of 200 pounds as a very active person times 15, and that's going to equal 3,000 calories. Now, 3,000 calories would be a non-caloric deficit. So that's how many calories I would need to maintain weight with my activity level on a daily basis. So if I wanted to lose weight, I'd have to be in a caloric deficit. Now, the deficit can be anywhere from 10 to 30%, depending upon the person. Now, who would need a 30% caloric deficit? Well, the more you weigh, the more weight you have to lose, the more aggressive your deficit needs to be. So if somebody was 300 pounds but needed to be 200 pounds, they might need a 30% caloric deficit. If someone was 250 pounds but needed to be 200 pounds, they might need a 20% caloric deficit. If someone's 200 pounds but they need to be 185 or 190, they might need a 10% caloric deficit. And if somebody was 150 pounds but they needed to be 130 pounds, they would only need a 5% caloric deficit. So this changes as you lose weight, but the beauty of it is every 5 or 10 pounds you lose, you can redo the calculation to find out your new macros. At some point, you don't need to lose weight anymore, so hopefully by that time, you have a good indicator of exactly what your macros and calories need to be, and you can experiment with stop tracking things. So for me, if I'm 200 pounds and I'm very active, I'm going to take 200 times 15 based upon the baseline, which is going to give me a baseline of 3,000 calories. Now, to put myself in a 10% calorie deficit, which I think wouldn't be too aggressive for most people who weigh 200 pounds, that's going to be 300 calories. So 3,000 times 0.1 for 10% is going to be 300 calories. Then I'm going to minus off the top of the 3,000 calories, leaving 2,700 calories at a 10% caloric deficit. Okay, pretty simple so far. So you can take your weight and you can take that times 10 or 15, 10 if you're sedentary, 12 if you're moderately active, 15 if you're highly active, and you can go from there to get your baseline calories. Now, depending upon how much you need to lose, you do your 30%, 20%, 10%, or 5% to figure out your calculation on what your caloric deficit would look like. Now, once you have your total caloric deficit, mine is 2,700 calories at a 10% caloric deficit, then I'm going to use that to figure out exactly where my macros need to be. So I would advise that your macro breakdown looks like mine, because this has worked so well for people. Most of the people have been on this breakdown that I've ever coached over the years. And I've coached people more than a dozen that have lost 100 pounds or more. 40% of your calories would come from fat, and then 30% would come from protein, and 30% would come from carbohydrates. And yes, the majority of fat that I consume the majority of calories that I consume comes from fat, and it's mostly animal fat with the occasional avocado oil or a handful of nuts here and there, but it's mostly animal fat, meaning it's coming from bacon and butter and red meat and chicken thighs and stuff along that line. So whole foods, all whole foods with the exception of the butter maybe. So if 40% of my calories are coming from fat, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the 2,700 times 0.4 for 40%, and that's going to give me 1,080 calories coming from fat. But fat is 9 calories per gram. So then I'm going to need to divide that number by 9 to show me exactly how many grams of fat that I'm going to eat on a daily basis. And in this instance, that's going to be 120 grams of fat based upon my calculation. Now, 30% of my calories are going to come from protein, and also 30% are going to come from carbs. So if we take the 2,700 times 0.3 for 30%, that's going to be 810 calories that are going to come from carbohydrates and equal from protein, because both carbs and fat are 4 calories per gram. So then the calculation's simple because it's the same for both. I take the 810 divided by 4 calories per gram, which carbohydrates are, and protein, and that's going to give me 202 grams of protein a day, and it's going to give me an equal amount of carbohydrates per day. So my macros, based upon my body weight times 15 at a 10% caloric deficit, break down to 40% fat, 30% protein, and 30% carbs, is going to be, on a daily basis, 120 grams of fat, 202 grams of protein, and 202 grams of carbohydrates. Now, you can use this yourself to put your exact weight in there and kind of go from there. Now, as you lose weight, every 5 or 10 pounds, you put your new weight through the calculation and maybe diminish the caloric deficit just a little bit. You can go down in 5% instead of the 20% or the 10% that I have in the, example here. And you can do that however you want, but this is just to start out. This is just to sort of get you going. The main thing that's going to have to do with your success long-term is going to be your adherence, though. The tighter you adhere to knowing exactly what's going in your body and putting everything you eat on a scale or in a tablespoon for a long period of time is going to give you the practice to where later you can eyeball it. You should not be logging your food forever. Eventually, you should get to a point where you're trained to eat mostly whole foods. You're full all of the time, and at some point you should just sort of know what's going on. Not that you don't need to check in from time to time. Now, I personally haven't logged my food in probably 4 or 5 years, but I do random check-ins. If the scale starts to creep up a little bit, I will log a week just to see where I'm getting on average, and then I'll want to tone that down a little bit, do the calculation, and kind of see where I need to be at for my calories, carbohydrates, fats, and protein. So adherence is a goal that most people need to have. You need to adhere to this. Now, this doesn't work if you're not weighing and measuring your food, because then you're guessing. And like I said earlier, it's really easy to overeat. Now, 2 tablespoons of peanut butter, and I'm talking about put in an actual tablespoon and leveled out on the top, is 200 to 230 calories depending upon the brand. A palm full of nuts is 250 to 300 calories depending upon the nut. If it's mixed nuts, cut the difference. But so what I'm saying is, like, if I use that as an illustration, a 1/4 cup of shredded cheese is going to be 110 calories. So it's very easy to overeat. It's especially easy to overeat if you're eating processed foods, because then on top of the processed foods, you're also starving, because that's what the foods are made to do. They make you hungry, and then you eat whole foods to the point where you're choosing the more calorically dense whole foods like the mixed nut and the shredded cheese and the peanut butter, right? Which is a poor example, because if I'm being really honest, I think peanut butter is a junk food personally. That's how I feel about it. But you can see how it would be very easy to overeat consistently. If you just use the peanut butter, the cheese, and the mixed nuts example, that's going to put you over 500 easy over 500 a day, which is going to gain you a pound a week. So working out does not expend enough energy for weight loss. It just doesn't, because you can work out to the maximum without injury on a daily basis and easily wash that out with one slice of pizza. You can easily wipe your workout out with a couple of beers. You can easily wipe your workout out even just with a nice big steak, which is really good for you, but a ribeye is going to have a lot of calories in it because of the fat content. So it's so easy to wash out exercise that you cannot depend on exercise as a form of fat loss. It just doesn't work. And clinically, it's never really been shown to work long term. If you want to take control of your weight, you're going to have to take control of your diet. And if you have a lot of weight to lose, you need to get on it real quick, and you get on it with some emphasis on really improving and positively impacting your health, because it's a big deal. It's not just a big deal to you, it's a big deal to everybody around you. Everybody that you see in the world is going to be impacted by your behavior. So we all need to take responsibility for that and move forward in a way that improves the lives of everybody that we have to do with. That's it for this video. I don't want to get in the weeds too far, but if you guys have any questions about this, go ahead and post those in the comments below, and I'll make sure I get those answered for you, because I do read the comments. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.